Hi everyone, this is Noah. I run this channel, President Foxman, and I just wanted to make this video asking this question: is utilitarianism just divine command theory with more steps? This has been an idea I've been throwing around since late high school for me, about 5 years ago, and I've been juggling with this, and I would really love to hear some feedback on this. This has been something, again, I've been processing, I've shared with people, and I thought was interesting. And so, I mean, why not? Why not put it here? So, first off, just a few claims that I'm starting out with. Utilitarianism was made to counteract the ongoing ethical structures of Jeremy Bentham's day, right? He was trying to provide an alternative to what was there. And what was there for the most part was divine command theory or other traditional kind of religious moral structures. Divine command theory goes something like, something is good or evil because God says it's good or evil. And there's no kind of further reasoning. It's just this kind of religious statement, but there's an element beyond that we could go into some other time. But the idea that, there's an ultimate God figure who's able to decide this. And some of you might be instantly thinking about some counters introduced in Plato. I don't see how those are necessarily super applicable, but again, we're not referencing divine command theory or trying to defend it here. We're just trying to introduce it because I think there are some major similarities here that might be interesting. Utilitarians accomplish this by trying to counter the divine command theory position by saying something like, the principle of utility, and we'll talk about that soon, is foundational, right? We don't need a proof for this principle because it is fundamental to all of the way we live and the way we act. That whether we like it or not, we are always acting with the principle of utility in mind. That can be controversial. I think people can agree or disagree, but we'll move on from there. I don't think this does anything to address divine command theory fully, as I'm seeking to prove, especially for people who are theists. And I don't know if that was the purpose of utilitarianism. I think in a certain sense it was to counter the traditional, to provide a new basis for morality and saying like, oh, let's pull it out of this kind of God sphere and let's pull it into a deeply human and individual sphere. And so my point is maybe that there's a little bit more compatibility here, and if you're using utilitarianism to counter divine command theory out of somebody else, I think there are some flaws in this structure. However, it doesn't give you any reason not to be a utilitarian. This is more of just something to note in conversations between these two structures. Okay, real quick rundown on what utilitarianism is, because I just do this for everyone who just happens to stumble around here. Principle of utility basically says what is good outcomes, and what is bad outcomes. And what we're looking for in any action is the best outcome. The right choice is the one with the best outcome, and the wrong choice is the one with the worst outcome, or the not as good. And you can go into a whole bunch of stuff, right? Like, if I choose the less good, even if they're like two good options, it'd be immoral to choose the still good but less good. So there's a lot of room around here, and how you decide what's good and bad, or like the best or worst outcome, is based off of hedonistic calculus, as Jeremy Bentham puts it, who's pictured here. And he says something along the lines of, you take the pleasure and the pain, and you basically say, whatever gives the most pleasure, or not whatever gives the most pleasure, You take the pleasure, subtract the pain, and that is your kind of valiance. There's way more to it. There's stuff about like future actions, how it's going to reproduce in the future, and not really worth our time right now. That's not really covering what we're thinking of, but we will reference this a little bit in the next section. So then I asked the question, how are we to use this? We're humans. We lack a lot of things, and so even with hedonistic calculus, we are severely limited in the way that we understand the effects of our actions, right? And some of these things we lack are reason. Our reason is not perfect. We have flawed reasoning. There's a reason why we talk about logical fallacies. That falls into failure of reason. Even utilitarians would admit that our reason isn't perfect, but reason itself is. Next up is intelligence, being able to know things about the world. So if I choose one thing or another, part of that is based off of my knowledge, my literal knowledge about, the effects of certain actions. Whether to do a forest burning to produce a better forest that will produce more oxygen, that will counter climate change, right? If I have less knowledge, I might think that burning down trees would be bad for the climate. And so greater intelligence leads to better decisions. Perception. Part of this is just individual bias. We all have our own biases, and we all see the world through our own lens. And that will prevent us from being able to make the decisions that will cause the most pleasure and the least amount of pain. So let's say, I think giving Reese's peanut butter cups to everybody on Halloween would be a great increase of pleasure. But I might lack the perspective of saying most people don't think that is the best candy, right? Even though I might love this candy. Bob down the street might hate it. And so providing a multiplicity of candies would be a more moral choice because it would lead to more pleasure. And so being able to have that perception, we all lack a certain amount of perception about how people respond to specific things. And so being able to fully comprehend the reactions. This is building on top of not just literal knowledge, but like intimate personal knowledge of somebody else, and how they react to specific stimuli. Agency, I think, is not enough to know the answer, right? We can have a machine that kind of spits out and gives the right answers, potentially. But if we're talking about a moral being, they have to be able to do things. And so they need some sort of level of agency. And I said benevolence, the will to do the right thing. I think here is where some utilitarians would disagree with me. I think they would say, if you're everybody, since the principle of utility is this universal thing, if you had all these other things, you would always be doing the thing that would result in the most pleasure for everyone. And I don't know about that. So I just added this. I think that's a fair addition just to kind of cover the bases. So these are all the things that not everybody has, actually none of us have full of. But we can do like a counterfactual, like what would it look like for a being to have all these things in full, right? Perfect reason, perfect intelligence, perfect perception, full agency, and full benevolence. And I think some of you who study philosophy of religion, you'll know where I'm kind of getting at. This is a definition of God. Traditionally, right, omnipotent with full agency, basically. Omniscient, all-knowing. Omnipresent, everywhere. There's a certain level of perspective. If you're in all places at once, and you are also omniscient, you know all the things, and so there's a level of this, and full benevolence. These are all kind of, again, most of these traditional proofs for God try to prove these attributes. And so how does a theist, or a utilitarian, right, who is convinced of theism, react to this? And there's a certain level of like, if they have good reason to believe that God exists, and they are spoken, like this God has spoken or will speak to them, and they don't doubt their perceptions, right? And I think these are three things I think we can all agree on. We have different levels of tolerance for all these things, but I think we're talking about the individual level. I think it's fair to say, if these three are present, then they have good utilitarian reasons to do what this God tells them to do, right? Because this is a perfectly moral being, and this moral being is able to communicate with this full agency, right? These precepts and rules to this human. And so it seems like the moral thing would be to always follow what this God says to do. And this produces some interesting outcomes, especially under this structure, right? Things that would normally not be in a traditional theist framework, right? Of God telling people to do potentially horrible things, but because there's a trust in the time span perspective, people will do the things and trust it comes out to a better outcome. I came up with a few examples myself. I think one of these is God says, arrest Jeremy Bentham and throw him in the Tower of London. And there's no reason. He's innocent of any crime, but they're told to do this, and so all the people do this. And out of some weird kind of twisted sense of butterfly effect logic, Jeremy Bentham being imprisoned causes a new type of jazz to be created that brings immense joy to many people that would counter the amount of suffering that Jeremy Bentham had to endure being locked up in prison. And, this God would know it, right? This God says, everybody, you have to eat bland potatoes for 5 or 50 years, right? You're going to, and your children will have to. And by some twisted sense of logic, by eating potatoes for 50 years, unexpectedly, everybody gets food and gets to eat their fill for the rest of their lives. And it also causes world peace, right? Like, we would be unable to comprehend that logic, those logical steps to get there. But that's because we lack perspective. But if we trust in some sort of divine moral agent, they can lead there. There's also some other stuff. There's no kind of sense that this God couldn't lie, right? Because we didn't there's nothing built into utilitarianism that says lying is necessarily bad. So this God could lie. And you could see a whole bunch of weird stuff about that. And sometimes maybe lying will lead to a better outcome. So telling people, do this because it's good for your health, but it might not be good for your health, but it might lead to a better outcome. There doesn't seem to be a scientific aspect to this. It's all about the results. Yeah, and so I guess I wanted to conclude on this. This seems interesting because I think the stereotypes that utilitarians tend to have about religious people fit into this framework pretty well, about having really closely held dogmas that suppress people and stop them from doing what they want to do. But through a utilitarian framework, if you believe in God, I think it leads you into this realm of doing whatever this God tells you without any consideration for any other aspect of the universe, any other aspect of morality. It's all about the outcomes and not about, the means to get there. It seems a little concerning. And so I think there's a reason why there's not too many utilitarian theists. But I just thought it was an interesting kind of thought experiment. So I hope you all enjoy it too. And yeah, have a good one. I'll be making more videos soon. And leave a comment below and tell me what you think.